You're listening to the Place We Find Ourselves podcast. I'm Adam Young, and this is part 2 of my interview with my friend KJ Ramsey. Today's episode looks more deeply at spiritual abuse because KJ shares parts of her story of abuse at the hands of Christian leaders. If you want to hear more of this story, you may want to check out her recently published book, which is titled The Lord is My Courage. And she shares a fair bit of her story of spiritual trauma, spiritual abuse in that book. Thank you so much for listening. Here's part 2 of my conversation with KJ. Let's transition a little bit to talk about Christians and their emotions. So you've got a chapter called He Leads Me, and in this chapter you talk about the relationship that many Christians have to our emotions. And this is what you say. If you grew up in church, chances are good that you've believed your emotions are the part of you that keep you from following God. I can't tell you how many times I've seen Christians posting quotes on social media saying things like, "Feelings aren't facts," or "Your feelings are lying to you, trust God." Common Christian wisdom seems to lead us to think that our big feelings are what lead us far from God. Now, when I read that part of the book, I immediately thought back to when I was in high school and college. There was a real popular kind of illustration that they used in churches and college ministries, and it was of a train with 3 train cars, and the engine of the train was labeled facts, the middle car was labeled faith, and the caboose was labeled feelings. So facts, faith, and the caboose is feelings. And the point of the illustration was that as Christians, we're not to be led by our feelings. Feelings are supposed to follow our faith. So what's your reaction to that, KJ?
I mean, I'm trying not to cuss right now, is what my reaction to that is. It's just not how it works. It's just not how it works. Like, we can say your faith needs to be what leads your whole self, but then we are being dishonest about the good bodies God created, which are constantly guiding us every moment of every day with our emotions.
Let me interject something, because what you said, a really important sentence. It's not how it works. Let me just share how true that sentence is. The way we know this, the way your brain works, you feel your emotions more quickly than your prefrontal cortex, which is the part of you that thinks, comes online. So I want to be really clear about this. As us human beings are going through our lives and you have an experience, like maybe you have a difficult interaction with a loved one, okay? You feel something about that. You have an emotion before your prefrontal cortex has even processed the interaction. So the caboose is not the caboose. It is the engine, neurobiologically speaking.
Yes.
You can't think about the Bible. You can't think about Jesus. You can't think about anything related to, your faith until you've felt your emotion. So when you say, KJ, that's not how it works, you're not kidding. It's not how it works.
Christians can spout that kind of statement off like however much they want. It's just not reality. And so why not honor the way God actually made us and pay attention to what it means for feelings to be at the front of that train? Because feelings are not the caboose that follows, and you can't just whip feelings into order. But what happens in practicality when we live out the kind of relationship the caboose metaphor shows us is we are actually traumatizing our bodies. We are traumatizing ourselves by working in the opposite direction of how God made our good bodies to work. And so we are asking ourselves to, essentially what you and I were talking about earlier, to cut off our awareness of what's happening. Because your emotions are going to keep being there, whether you call them bad names or not, whether you shame them or not. They're constant and reflexive. You can't change that facet of being a human being, and you actually don't need to. And I would love nothing more than for it to become more of a norm in the church that we don't traumatize ourselves by like treating ourselves like, well, this shouldn't be there, so I'm gonna shove it down. Emotion, energy and motion, emotion. Your emotions are actually meant to move you into safety, connection, and life. Energy has to go somewhere, and if it does not go somewhere, it becomes stuck. And this is how trauma happens. Like, it is all of this unexpressed emotion, this energy that did not get to be discharged, that actually weighs our bodies down and our stories down in a way that we don't get to move toward the freedom and wholeness that are ours in Jesus. Our emotions are to be respected. They are to be listened to. They are telling us really important information about what we need and what we are experiencing.
We're going to now transition to more of the spiritual abuse, church wounding part of your book, which reminds me of your really pastoral words at the beginning of how this subject, just talking about, just listening to two people talk about it, can be hard and disruptive and painful if you've experienced harm at the hands of spiritual leaders, those who are in a position of spiritual authority. But you talk about it in your book, and I want to share some of what you say here. It is the section where you talk about our tendency to dismiss red flags when we see them. And here's how you put it. You say it's shockingly easy to dismiss red flags when doing so benefits you in some way. It's what we, and you're talking about you and your husband Ryan, had been doing for years, mostly under the surface of our awareness, out of the need to keep our careers on track, because he was a pastor, and to keep food on our table. But we couldn't stomach it anymore. We were realizing that even though it could be easier to keep our livelihood and to keep some relationships by staying silent and compliant, we would lose our integrity. And then here's this massively important sentence. This is such a good sentence. You write, incongruence becomes the currency of our belonging. Now, I love that sentence. You're such a good writer. Incongruence becomes the currency of our belonging. Now, what do you mean, KJ? What do you mean by incongruence? Let's just start with that. What do you mean by incongruence? How is that related to dismissing red flags?
Incongruence is essentially when there are two realities, which, let's be honest and truthful and humble about this. We all embody some level of incongruence all of the time. We trade our authenticity of what's actually happening and is true within us for approval, connection, and a sense of security about our place in a community. So what that looks like practically, I'll give you more of an example from what that was for Ryan and I, with him as a pastor. So us being in this environment where it was not safe to be honest about the domineering way our pastor lived, the way he yelled at people all the time, that we could not say, this isn't okay. This hurts. you can't talk to me like this. Because we learned very quickly, like, when you are honest, you get hurt more. Like, you will have opportunities taken away from you. You will be shamed publicly in a staff meeting or in the foyer of the church. Like, we learned very quickly what is not allowed to maintain attachment to our pastor and the rest of our staff, and by virtue of that, also the rest of the church. And so it was easier to silence what was our inner self was telling us about this community and about this person, this pastor, and his lack of character, about our safety. It became easier to silence all of that, including the sensations that were speaking up, and maintain a semblance of agreeableness, because Ryan wanted to be a pastor, and this was his first job in a church. And we felt like, well, God provided this. So we trade incongruence, dishonesty, truly, for belonging, for attachment.
So up until now, we've kind of focused on brief excerpts from your book, The Lord is My Courage, but I need to read 2 full paragraphs, because what you're unpacking in these paragraphs, I think, is so important for people that have experienced spiritual trauma. And here's what you write. Loyalty is not a Christian virtue or fruit of the Spirit. Faithfulness is. Loyalty is about the maintenance of dominance and hierarchy, but faithfulness is about love that pursues the good of others. Faithfulness demands that we look closely for love and its fruits before we keep assigning goodness and giving trust to a leader or group. When people you once gave your trust to treat you with derision, it poisons your trust in yourself. There's more, but I'm just going to repeat that sentence. When people you once gave your trust to treat you with derision, it poisons your trust in yourself. Before the courage of disloyalty frees you, the incongruence of being in a system that demands unswerving loyalty will lace your mind with fear. But even though fears that you might be crazy or blowing everything out of proportion will haunt your every step for a long season, with time and tenderness, you can untangle the lies. Okay, that's 2 paragraphs from The Lord is My Courage. Let's slow this way down. You're putting your finger on something very important here. You are saying that when we place our trust in certain spiritual leaders and those people wound us, what happens is that we lose trust in ourselves, in our guts, in what I call your knower. The experience of being wounded by those in a position of spiritual authority, it poisons my ability to trust my own gut. Now, what do you mean by that?
When we are in relationship with others who, especially those in power, dismiss and deny our experience of reality because of their positional power, because they are people that we look to reflexively, naturally, even in a good way, to gain a sense of self, gain a sense of truth. We then learn to say, well, what I'm feeling, what I'm experiencing, what my body is saying is false. It truly can't be this bad if that person doesn't agree with me, if they don't seem to own it. It is not faulty of us to look to a pastor or a parent as a source of what's true and a source of help. They're supposed to be somebody that is responsive to us and to our needs, and is also showing us what is good and right and true. And when someone with that power, who is in that position to speak to and show what is true, what is good and right and true, particularly around scripture, faith, the divine. And what they show us is actually shut up and show up no matter how tired and exhausted you are. We learn to shut down core, beautiful, necessary parts of ourselves. And it's letting those wake up that liberates us and that heals us. But really we're talking about gaslighting. You really worry, am I crazy for saying this person that everybody seems to fawn over is actually abusive, or actually like killing me, killing my soul? Because you do feel crazy. Even the people who teach others about gaslighting have internalized so much gaslighting often in our church communities, in our early childhood development, like that Ryan and I, still on occasion would question whether we blew this out of proportion, like what we experienced in our church, even having already written 304 pages of a story of this harm that happened, and having had scores of people say, oh my word, I can't, that's terrible, like read it and tell me how terrible it is. There still would be moments of disbelief of my own story, and Ryan has experienced that too. And that's how much that trust gets shattered in our relationship to ourselves, that even somebody who knows the terms and gives others permission to heal questions her own reality. And the really cool part of this story is recently I got a Facebook message from somebody who left the church that I talk about in this book, and his story is his to tell, but I will say that he reached out to me after reading this book and was like, I don't feel crazy now for leaving, even when the rest of my community stayed there, because you expressed what I experienced too. And I never expected that I was going to get that gift back of somebody telling me the truth about what I lived, because it was their truth too. I think this gets back to that trauma is what happens in the absence of an empathetic witness. We get to witness the truth in each other, and when we reflect back the truth, we really do a potent work of healing regarding our ability to know what is real about our lives and our stories. Telling the truth is so worth it, even when we're still afraid that we might be blowing things out of proportion, or we might have tons of people dismiss it and call us liars.
There's one more quote I want to read before we wrap up, KJ, and it's right in this same theme. You write that I encounter so many clients who are afraid of and even allergic to giving their pain from other Christians a proper name. We fear doing so will cut us off from any belonging we have. So we minimize the harm with nicer sounding names and narratives like church hurt and a difference of opinion. So this is something, it's so important to be clear about this. When we are wounded by people in our church community, particularly people in spiritual authority, one of the reasons it is so difficult to name it and to address it is that we are afraid that if we bring it up, if we bring it up into the light, we might lose relationships that are very important to us, which is exactly what happened to you. And this I can put it this way. The engine that keeps spiritual abuse churning is the fear of losing a sense of belonging. Yeah. Full stop. The engine that keeps spiritual abuse churning, it is the fear that I feel inside of losing a sense of belonging. In other words, losing relationships that are very important to me. I know you resonate with that because it's your writing, but what are your thoughts as I read it?
Even after we've left a community, the fear of losing more belonging remains, and the pain of what we have lost remains. And I think that the discomfort that we have with naming that I didn't just, like I say in the book, I didn't just skin the knee of my spirituality. A pastor essentially took a knife to my soul by his actions, and the leaders around him in their protection of him and his power and the institution's power rather than me as a person and my own good. That was a sword to my soul, and that resulted in so much distress, that resulted in so many things like panic attacks, not being able to handle sitting inside of a church. There's so many consequences physically of the sword that was taken to my soul, and I'm not the only one. So naming the wound is very risky, but we risk not healing fully if we do not name it fully. When I was still tiptoeing around the truth of how bad it was, I was not getting to face how bad it really was, and the inner needs for belonging that I had that compelled me to put up with abuse and call it love. I feel compassion for everybody that has experienced harm or a lack of safety in the church, and is really afraid to speak up about it or tell the truth in retrospect, because I do know how telling the truth will require us to take action. Once you start telling the truth, you can't stay chained. The beautiful part is there is more love out there, and there is actual belonging out there that doesn't require you to bully yourself and be bullied by others. But the loneliness of wandering into the wilderness to actually gain that belonging with Jesus in yourself is incredibly hard to face.
And so as we end, what I want to say to you is that I have immense honor for you. You are what I call a warrior princess. Those two words together. Like, you've overcome immense spiritual abuse from trusted Christian leaders. And if you ever became a pastor, like when I read your book, what I thought is, if this woman ever becomes a pastor, I would be honored to submit to your leadership and to serve under your authority, because your character has been proven in the fire, and you would rule with strength and tenderness and justice.
I'm speechless.
You don't need to say anything. I want you to know that that's my experience of you, is a desire to submit to your authority, because you have it and you have character. And it's come at such a high cost.
I do want to say one thing to those who haven't received words like that yet. I think this is the way of Jesus. His love came at such a cost. And when we are courageous, we practice this courage to tell the truth about our lives, to listen to the truth that our bodies are telling, to seek wholeness for ourselves and for more than just ourselves, we can become shepherds who make a spacious place for others. I think there is a swelling, in a good sense, of those of us who are surviving these experiences, that there are true shepherds being raised up. We the wounded out in the wilderness are becoming people of welcome. And I know that that's who you are too.
Thank you for coming back on the podcast, KJ, and thank you for writing The Lord is My Courage. If folks want to you can get the book wherever books are sold. And if you want to find out more about KJ, you have a website. What's your website, KJ?
Yeah, it is kjramsey.com. And it's got all the things, all the links to all the things.